Hey folks, Simon here from the Velo Performance Podcast. In this month's episode, I'm interviewing my inspirational guest, Louise Harris. Louise is an experienced triathlete going to the 70.3 World Championships and to the long distance championships in Kona. But after suffering a hamstring strain which basically stopped her from doing long distance running, she decided that she'd challenge herself in a different way and decided to take up long distance cycling instead. Ironman is hard, but Louise wanted to do something harder, so she decided to do Land's End to John O'Groats and from John O'Groats back to Land's End, but not only do that, but try and beat a world record. Louise used to live in Devon and she was down for the weekend, so I was lucky enough to get her into the office and speak to her face to face. This is a great podcast in understanding how you plan for these types of events, some of the physiological and psychological mental barriers you deal with, and it's a really cool conversation. She's really candid and open to chat to. I hope you really enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into the podcast. You've obviously just done the jog, so the reason why I've got you in because is Louise used to live locally. She's down here for the weekend, and I was like, look, let's chat. Now, normally we do this across video, but it's like, let's talk because you've just done from Land's End to John O'Groats, then back from John O'Groats to Land's End. So tell us why to start off with, because this is a great story.
Why? So I suppose lots of reasons led me to this, but I suppose it's quite important also to mention that I only decided to do this about 3 weeks before I did it.
Okay.
And that's not to say, check me out, I can just hop on a bike and I can just do something like this. That is not to say that in the slightest, and I'll go into that, like the training side of things more, but I have been injured, so I can't necessarily do like Ironman, which was always my thing, and I've done 9 of them and I really loved it. And that's kind of like the sort of treadmill that I was on at the time, and not being able to run meant that obviously triathlon was kind of a little bit sidelined. I can do various bits of running, but not how I want to. And I saw a window of opportunity to do something a bit different. So that was kind of that, if we part that. The other side of things was when I was doing Ironman, I kind of got to the stage, right, like we were just saying about like being a project manager, like as a triathlete, if you're doing Ironman, you're working full time and obviously trying to set up a business from scratch. Like triathlon becomes so much about you. And in 2019, I went to the ITU Worlds, 70.3 Worlds and Kona, all in the same year. And that was amazing to be able to experience that. But the sort of lingering taste in my mouth after it was, I'm project managing me. Like, this is all about me. And it really didn't sit well. I felt like mine and my husband's life just literally revolved around me. And as an amateur, that did put, I think maybe as a professional, that would be slightly different. But it was a funny feeling. And I think at the time in 2019, I think I finished Kona. We were lucky enough to be able to stay in Hawaii for a little bit longer and have a holiday. And I think I realised then that like that kind of doing that is going to be parked for a bit. That coincided then with, of course, COVID, with my injury. Yeah. And it just became this like natural feeling of like this needs to give me more than just it all been about me. And that was when I set up Mojo, and that was also when I think I started to look more into sort of more charitable things that I could do with my time, and I had a bit of time, and that's when I got increasingly more interested in animal rescue, animal welfare, and I've always loved dogs, so like I was very sort of focused on like what could I do for dogs. So sort of fast forward, that was 2019, kind of fast forward, that was bubbling away for a little while. And this year I was out in Lanzarote. We wanted a bit of a last minute holiday to go and do some cycling, and I was out in Lanzarote and I follow the charity that I raised the money for, Galgos Del Sol, and I've been out to volunteer with them as well the previous year, and just like an indescribable cruelty that was happening to these dogs, and the government basically excluding them from any animal welfare bit, and it upset me so much that I just turned around to him and I just said at the breakfast table, I was just like, I'm doing something that is going to be that I can do with my talent to raise money for these dogs.
So where is this? So talk us through the charity.
So the charity's out in Spain.
Yeah.
It's out in southern Spain near Alicante, and they are one of many charities that rescue this type of Spanish hunting dog called Galgos. There's lots of them, lots of charities. But the reason why there's lots of charities that rescue them is because there's around 100,000 of these dogs a year that are bred and then killed after the hunting season. And nobody knows about it. Almost without exception, nobody I speak to ever knows about it. And a lot of us have all been to Spain a lot. And it blows your mind in that they are probably the most abused breed of dog in the world. Because they are bred, they are used for the very short couple of month window of hunting, but there's also betting that goes with it, and the government want to keep it. And so they are bred and then they're discarded. And the best case scenario for these dogs is that the doors are open and they go out onto the streets and they're not neutered and they get run over. And that's the best case scenario for these dogs.
Wow, all right, okay.
So it's very hard when you come across something like that to then go back into the, yes, but I'm going to pump thousands of pounds every year into my racing world. And I wanted to combine the two. So that was when I decided I wanted to do something. Well, of course, I can't do anything necessarily running-wise because I can't do any long-distance running at the moment, or maybe even never again.
What have you done to yourself?
So I've got more of a temporary thing is I've got a high hamstring tendinopathy. That's getting much better, but I've got pubic symphysis, which is like a kicking sport injury, bizarrely. But it's basically where my in the middle of my pelvis is an area that's been exceptionally inflamed, maybe from my pelvis being slightly tilted, and that tends to not get better. The severity I've got, it tends to not get better. It's like career ending for professional footballers and what have you. So
right.
Okay. So trying to manage that.
So something had to change from a sport perspective, but you could ride a bike.
Because if you could take away, I've been so singularly focused. So I didn't start triathlon until I was 30. And I suppose it's also important to say at this point, like I loved running. I'd been running for a couple of years, I'd done a marathon for charity and what have you.
I mean, good point out that you can run.
I can run.
Like you're running
that is my thing,
is good.
But I'd never ridden a bike in my life. I didn't know the difference between a mountain bike or a road bike. I didn't even know how it worked. So we were a family very much not of cyclists. We never even had them as kids.
Right.
And I couldn't swim more than 4 lengths of a pool. And I was 30 at this point. And so I've always been very determined, very singular focused. And I was like, I'm going to do triathlon. And the competitiveness, I am competitive. Some people have said that's not a necessarily good trait in the past. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think if it managed well, I think it is a great trait. I think it drives you forward.
Yeah.
So you take yourself out of the treadmill of competing in Ironman 70 points for a triathlon for years and years and years through injury, but you still have the competitive nature. You still want to do your absolute best, and I think that's what it comes down to. Is I always want to do my best.
So you've been injured, and you started riding the bike a bit more because that's the only thing really you could do. And then so you say you decided 3 weeks before you did Land's End to John Goats, back to Land's End again, but you had obviously clearly ridden the bike beforehand a fair bit of distance.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to say that because people listening might go, she's never ridden a bike.
From 30 to 43, I rode a bike.
Yeah.
I got into it, and albeit I got on a bike and very quickly bought a TT bike because someone said if you point that in that direction and go really fast, like you'll do well at triathlon. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
So I didn't pick up a lot of skills along the way initially. I didn't pick up much bike handling skills, let's put it that way. And also you don't need to ride in groups because what's the point if you're doing Ironman? You need to be away from people. Yeah. So I didn't have a lot of bike handling skills, but working with Rob, I very much realised, a good 4 years ago that I needed to up my game with every aspect of cycling and worked with him quite a lot. And that was fantastic. So yes, I've done a lot on the bike, and I think probably I do feel now like I'm probably a stronger cyclist than I am runner.
Yeah.
So I have done a lot.
So you got injured. You thought, right, let's ride my bike a little bit, stay fit. when was the moment, or because you say you decided to do this 3 weeks before you actually did the event, but surely you'd had a mindset, think, I want to do something for the Galgos dogs? Galgos. So when was the thought process, I'm going to do this challenge?
So I suppose it was like back in, a while ago over a glass of wine, I did say to a friend, we're having this silly conversation about...
it's generally over a glass of wine.
Yeah. How fast do you think you could do so-and-so? And it's like, do you reckon you could do so-and-so? It was that kind of conversation where you've just been goofing around and been silly. And so I said, right, Lance and John are great. What's the women's record? Looked at it and went, oh my God, it scares you.
So back then, what was the women's record?
I can't remember. It was
11 days.
It was hours. No, the women's record for one way.
For one way. Okay.
Yeah, so this was just goofing around at this point, and I was like, whoa, I am not in that world, you know, I'm not in that 12-hour, 24-hour time trial kind of world, you know. Because I identify as a triathlete, and still do. I not for a second identified as a cyclist, so I almost felt like I wasn't in that world. And what about coming back? What about going up and coming back? What's the record for that? And as we were having this conversation, we realised no one had done it. No woman had done it. Men had done it, but there was nowhere on the old Google search that said that any woman had gone up and back. And I remember saying at the time, like, and this was before COVID, you know, I remember saying, like, why has no one ever attempted this? It never even entered my head that, you know, why wouldn't someone try it?
Did that spark something then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course then everything was put to bed because I was a triathlete and that was all I was ever going to do at that point, you know, I was never going to get off that treadmill. And then obviously, you know, a lot of various stuff happened, you know, COVID, starting a business, moving to Bristol, blah, 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 injury. And then in Lanzarote, when I got, you know, very upset about all this abuse that was happening and I said, I'm going to do something for charity, I decided to cycle from Bristol to the centre in Spain.
Right.
And it was around about 1,800 miles.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to do it. No, sorry, it's not that far. 1,300 miles. I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it 200 miles a day. And so that was that seed planted, came back, you know, I had a bit more of a thing, you know, injury still not getting better, triathlon wasn't really happening this year for me, apart from obviously coaching. And I was just about to press the button on it and say, this is my charity event. And I stopped and I had a chat with my husband and I said, there's something that doesn't feel right about this. And he said, what do you want to do it for? And I said, I want to do it to raise money. He said, is that your singular focus? Yeah, singular focus, want to raise money. And I remember looking back and thinking, of the people who have been interested in like the Ironman that I've done, or even Kona or like world champs and stuff, more people have been interested in me doing the London Marathon that year than ever were interested in any Ironman that I did. And that's not to say they didn't support me and stuff, but they identified with London Marathon.
Yeah.
They can see it on the telly. They know so many people who have probably done it. They've probably done it. They've probably gone into the ballot. They've interacted with London Marathon, whereas a lot of people have never interacted with Ironman, because although we think everyone has, it's still quite a niche thing, isn't it?
And then the other thing, from going from the UK to Spain, people can't fathom that as a distance.
And also, it sounds like a holiday. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I said I'm going to do 200 miles a day cycling through France to Spain, everyone will be like, that's nice, dear. You'll have a nice time.
Yeah, but I think we both know it's not a holiday.
No, no, we know that. But I think what I really needed to do was go in with that singular focus of like, what was I trying to do? I was trying to raise money, and to raise money you have to have people interact with your mission.
Yeah.
And what you're doing. And so that's when I said, this is it. That this is where we can try it. But in the meantime, a lady had done it.
Oh, really?
So in 2020, Marcia Roberts put a record time down. You know, she did it for Guinness Book of Records.
When did you hear about that? And did that make you go, right, I want to try and get that offer?
I heard about it in 2020 when she did it, actually. And no, at the time, like, life just wasn't, you know. And also, I was still on triathlete, and there's no way I'm going to have time. If you want to do something like that, you've got to do it in the summer. The summer for me for the last 15 years has been like race. Yeah. There is no summer, it's just racing. So I was interested in it, but it was more of a passing thought, I think, because that just wasn't what I could do. There was a window of opportunity wasn't going to open up for me to give it a go. But I was a bit like, damn.
Right.
Someone's put a marker down. It was only until more recently when I thought, thank God someone's put a marker down. Because who's to say that I would have like tootled up and back and gone, well, there you go. There's not a record to beat, there's just a record to set, which is a very different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. So it's like, how can I do this? You know, you could have taken 13 days and you still have got a record for it.
Yeah.
You
You
know?
could have taken 20 days.
Yeah.
You know, there just wasn't a record. And
But actually having a goal to beat makes it a bit more interesting.
definitely, and I learned so much of this through Glyn, through my husband, because he's paddled Land's End on a Groats in a kayak.
Yeah.
And I was always fascinated in mostly the psychology of it. I'm no paddler, I'm not interested in paddling, but in the psychology of it, in the fact that he set that record because he was the first person to ever do it 10 years ago. He does still hold the record.
10 years ago? It doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, okay.
But he still holds the record for it time-wise, but he reckons he could halve it if he went and did it now. But at the time, he probably could halve it because he knows there's a marker put down and he knows he can get better. At the time, he was like, play it cool, don't go too hard. And I suppose the same for me. Like I could have, if I didn't have a record to beat, if I wasn't doing the joggle and every day going, where am I in relation to the record? Yeah. Where am I in relation to what Marcia did in 2020? And how much more have I got to do? And that was constantly the conversation of where I am in relation to the record.
Wow. So this year, did you say you'd ridden 100 miles every day for 10 days? Yeah,
so in May, we went on holiday to France in the camper van and took the dogs.
And this was a holiday, but riding...
This was a holiday. This was purely a holiday. I just happened to take a book with me that someone had bought 10 years ago, which was all around cycling from St Malo to Nice. And so we were like, we'll do a little bit of this. I'll ride, I'll get some training in, but I'll follow a little bit of this route. I'm about half an hour getting off the ferry, and I just finished doing my last bits of work to put that to bed. I'm just getting off the ferry in St Malo, and I sort of said to my husband, like, so what are we doing? He said, well, I just thought you were going to ride the whole route. And I was like, well, I didn't know this was the plan. Shall I give it a go? He's like, yeah. I said, well, we need to get some like nutrition in then. I need to get going. I need to start tomorrow morning pretty early because this was quite mind-blowing, this 100 miles a day and getting to Nice. And we did it. And we did it comfortably.
But that's the thing, so that's what I was saying to you before we even started doing this, like, you know, riding 100 miles every day for 10 days, it's actually quite easy in a comfort way of doing things. It probably takes about 6 to 6.5 hours if you're riding
good weather,
steady,
good roads,
good food, sleep, you know, all these sort of things.
Yeah, no work.
It's not the same as doing what you've just done, which is mammoth.
No, but it did plant the seed that I could do it.
Yes. Yeah, and also, yes, exactly. So you ride 100 miles every day, and you come off the back and think, well, actually, what if I can do that?
Could I do almost double? It's how my brain works, and everyone around me rolls their eyes and goes, what's she up to next?
Yeah, no, it's good though, it's good. So, I mean, I love that. I mean, you know, so 3 days before we decided to go and do Land's End to John O'Groats, back from John O'Groats to Land's End, I think realistically, it was like, talk us through the whole thing in a, what did you expect it to feel like, and in reality, what are the things that you look at now and think I was really naive in that thinking, or what things really worked for you that you'd already put into place that worked? How did you plan it in a we need to do this quickly, so route planning, that's tough for... Which
very much helped that you'd done it 3 days before.
Yes, I'm not going that way.
I could look at what you'd done and we could go, well, this is the plan route, and what did Simon do, and you know, what's the advantages and disadvantages of this, and obviously, like, you know, you did big miles, you did bigger miles than me, and did it faster than me, but it was
I wasn't coming down the other way.
But you weren't coming down, so you weren't saving anything.
No.
But I went into it with a mindset of not saving anything either, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to the top in 5 days.
But then your route differed from mine, so I went up the west coast and all the way around that.
You went Great Glen, yeah.
Yes, and you went up the A9.
Yeah.
Which is definitely the straighter route up there. It's a quicker route, if you say that way. But, you know, again, I was trying to stay away from traffic. And I'll admit that when I came down the A9 on the way home, I was like, if Lou's coming up here, she's brave. You know,
I only went up it on the last bit.
Right.
I only joined it at the last bit where it was much quieter.
Okay.
I stayed well away from it.
Yeah. And good, because you know, we were driving down. People drive this road way too fast.
Oh no, I couldn't.
It's scary.
I'm not brave with traffic, really.
No. So you did from Land's End, from John O'Groats, from Land's End to John O'Groats. How many days did it take you to do that?
So that was 4 days and 17 hours.
Right.
To get up to the top.
Yeah.
And then overall, getting back was 10 days and 5 hours.
Which is phenomenal.
So it drops a bit at the end. But the thing about on the way
headwinds
up,
on the way home.
Oh,
they were horrendous.
Did we have headwinds on the way back? And the last day is almost like that's a good few chapters in itself. That last day, that was absolutely brutal. And I would say for every day, I just adored every bit of it. The entire way up, the entire way back, with the exception of Cornwall on the way back, where I messed it up. And it was like, double whammy really. It was hard, it was headwind, it was bad weather, it was very hilly. But also I was annoyed with myself because I messed it up on the way back.
In what way?
In that bit. So all the stuff I'd learned on the way up, all the stuff that was working really well for me, and I saw it as a real success. Like every day for me was a real success. Every day I even went over 100 miles was just like, wow, how are you doing this, Lou? Like almost a bit of disbelief. But I had a little routine going with a lot of stuff, a routine with food. I made a couple of mistakes, but they weren't so bad I couldn't remedy them. Psychologically it was going well, and I often talk to sort of the ladies that I coach. Like I look at performance with through 4 different panes really of a window, and I always think of the psychological, physiological, tactical and technical side of things, and in the middle is performance. And I think if you move that too far into one of those panes and focus solely on training, focus solely on I don't need to train, I've got a good mindset, I'll keep going, psychological. Or if you go too far into thinking, overthinking, the bike, the bike's got to be perfect and everything, or my kit's got to be perfect. Or in the tactical side where you think, well, I don't need to do anything else, I'll just follow Simon's route, he did it. I'll be really tactful and I'll just pick a well-trodden route. Any of those, I think if you focus too much, you have to be in the middle and you have to focus on all of it. And what I did on the way back is I got very excited because obviously coming from the southwest, the first 100 miles of the day, first of all, I was going to do 230 miles in a day. Never have I done that. It's well beyond my physiology to do that with the weather and with what the load I had in my legs already.
And headwind, because it was
and a headwind.
For the last 2 days watching you, watching it, think that's really tough.
Yeah, it was, and I don't think I realised quite how tough it was. I was so unbelievably headstrong to get in under these 10 days, to have 9 days and something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so headstrong, to the point where I had to be in Bristol on the last day because I knew Bristol to Land's End was very slightly possible. And I just didn't break it up enough. And with the first 100 miles, I met so many people. I cannot tell you how many people came out to say hello.
That's cool.
And there were people driving for 5 hours to come and see me on the route for a few minutes.
So any of these people know you?
Yeah, friends, family, people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
But, childhood friends, the lady who I volunteered with at Galgos, who I've only known for a week, but she got so behind it. She drove all the way from Suffolk.
Wow.
People, but also on the last day, people were giving me or Glyn, bags with champagne, balloons. You've done it. Psychologically, I'd done it.
Yeah.
And I was only in Bridgewater.
Still a long way from Bridgewater.
Well, probably the last supporter was Oakhampton.
Right. Okay.
And some of the Mojo ladies came out near Oakhampton and had a big banner and stuff. And
Oakhampton to Land's End.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long way still.
But I'd done it.
Yeah.
And the rain started. And it was 10 o'clock at night and I was losing the light. Well, no, it wasn't. It was about 8, 9 o'clock at night. I was losing the light and I said to Glyn, I need to stop. I need to sleep. And he was just like, no, you keep going with the light because you've got a long night coming.
Yeah.
But one of the things I never ever thought, so many things went to plan. More things went better than I ever thought they would.
So what were they?
How my legs felt, how my body felt, the lack of saddle sores. I didn't have one.
That's
just for the entire. I was astounded because I've suffered with that, particularly on the TT bike in races and stuff. So how I felt, how we worked together as a team, the two of us and the dogs, and how we overcame stuff like really easily. Eating, like I had these awful stories of people having to liquidize their dinners so they could get food down.
Oh, really?
And I just, I just couldn't think of anything worse really, because the one thing you can look forward to is maybe like a square meal, or I got recovery right. I was waking up every morning amped physically and amped mentally. At 6 o'clock, let's go, let's do it. I felt like I was in charge. I was driving the ship of what I was doing.
So what do you think you got right so what were you eating that made you feel good? Or were you just eating normal food and that seemed to work?
No, normal food, yeah, definitely. I was eating like, the pasta, the like fresh pasta, like they're like ravioli, the quick stuff you boil for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's super quick, I can get in the van, I can tell Glenn what I want, he puts it in, done. It doesn't have to be ready for me, prepared. But also, we were very agile as a team. Like, I would literally just have to say to Finn, I fancy that, and it would be there. And that was just so important.
So did you take a lot of stuff with you and then buy stuff along the way?
We bought stuff along the way every day. Like bought stuff, if not multiple times a day. Just like, what do you fancy?
Yeah.
And I supported Glyn on other stuff as well, in the van in that style. But I also supported him on a Devizes to Westminster kayak race, which is 126 miles, I think, like overnight. And I think between us, we have that endurance brain, and I would say to him, he had to get out of over 70 something different logs. And as he got out was my opportunity to shove food in his mouth. And I got very in tune with like, you thirsty, are you hungry, do you want salt, do you want sweet, do you want bulk, do you want protein? And and it was the same with this trip. I knew what I wanted, and he almost knew it as well. So
I mean, the thing about being a helper and supporter in these things. So obviously, I've just come back from the lakes supporting Calvin, and having done these long distance back to back, and then lands into John O'Groats. Being the athlete or the person doing it, if you've got a good support team, and my support team were excellent. They were like, what do you want? What do you fancy? If we can get it, we'll get it. You realise that when you are the one that's supporting those. You need them to take charge and let them make a decision, but sometimes you need to step in and go, you've got to have this, you've got to have that, and ask the right questions. And if you've been supporting your husband doing his stuff and he's supporting you, once you've gone through that experience yourself and you're helping the other person do it, you suddenly go, well, you also, as you say, you automatically get into that rhythm thing. I'm going to ask them those questions and make sure that they're, well, you know what their response is, or if their response is a bit off, you realise actually we really do need to do this. But it becomes intuitive from that sense.
It does, and you become such a well-oiled machine as a team. And I think that was one of the things that we just did so well. We just did really, really gel. But that's not to say it all went like 100% amazingly well, because the other thing is having someone who is your partner come and do that with you is they don't want to see you in pain. And so I felt like I had to maybe hide some of that, but also, like we were saying earlier, like there were a couple of times on the way back we got to John O'Groats, and for the last, as a sign of me like pulling a face, like 85 miles to John O'Groats, and it was already like 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was like, oh my God, I really need to get there today. I knew I had a big task ahead of me, and the entire way, so I had my phone out in front of me on the bike, and the entire way, momentum was building with getting donations coming in. So my phone would ping, an email would come in every time there was a Just Giving donation. But also my phone would ping when there was a message to say, well done Lou, I know you can do it. I really hope you can get there today. We're all thinking about you. And this just built and built and built to the point where when I got to the top, I almost thought I'd done it. Like in my mind, I got there in under 5 days, and that was it. I was done. So, and what I also wanted to do tactically was I always wanted to get to the top and come a tiny bit back. So when I woke up the next morning, I didn't have the whole thing to do again. Even if I was 10 miles back.
Did you do that?
No. Because I got there so late.
Yeah, okay.
And then that's the other thing about having, a support crew, Glyn said, do you need to make it today? Do you want to sleep? It's a big task. You know, it's going to be 11 o'clock by the time you get there. It's going to be dark, which actually wasn't, because it doesn't get dark in Scotland this time of year. I had to push him to go, please, will you let me do this today? And then he wanted to reduce the mileage on the way back and go, look, you've done it in a great time. You're ahead of the record already. You're looking strong. You're feeling strong. You know you're going to do it. Let's reduce the mileage. And I had to have a bit of a word and say, but I feel good. Like, you want to reduce the mileage because you're tired, but not me. So we had to have a couple of difficult conversations like that. And bearing in mind our conversations, if you put every conversation over 24 hours, we only had about 20 minutes to talk. Quick this, quick that, quick sign, quick, you know.
Eat dinner, go to bed.
100%. Like, we only had a very small amount of time to talk about this stuff and discuss it. And he was helping me plan the routes every evening on Strava and stuff. And so I know he took a huge burden on as well. And if something went wrong, if the route wasn't good or the route didn't work out very well, he took that hard because he knew that he was affecting.
Did that happen?
Yeah, a few times, Which it has to in 1,800 miles, I think. Yeah. You have to take the wrong, well, not take the wrong turning, but we went on the way back, we went through Preston and various different places. Oh my word, I mean.
Was it, what were they, just bad roads or?
Well, it was through the city at night, a lot of boy races.
Wow, all right.
You know, and just an example of what Glyn had to go through is I pushed him that day because I had to put in a big day and I wanted to do 200 miles.
How did he cope with you pushing him? Did he accept it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was tired.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he accepted it, but he obviously was forsaking a lot of his time. He needed to chill and sleep, and he was up as much as me. You know, he wasn't like kipping in the
well, that's the thing.
lay-bys.
When you're supporting people, and the people that supported me doing mine, and me supporting anybody that's done sort of 24-hour things, you are on the go all the time, because actually you, as a cyclist, you travel so much ground so quickly.
Yeah.
And as the support crew, you realise you don't have that time to stop and chill and sleep.
I mean, that day when I went through Preston, I'd done 197 miles. And I only stopped in the end because I was like, Glyn's done.
Really? Okay.
I could have cracked on, but he was done. We've got a big tall van. We couldn't get through this bridge because it was a low bridge. We came to a natural stop and it was dark. And
how did you feel about that? Did you, in hindsight, do you think that was the right thing to have done and it was fortuitous, or did you feel like you could have pushed on a bit more?
Hard to say, because the thing about doing that mileage, which I never appreciated from doing France, when I was stopping at 3 o'clock and going for a walk and a croissant and walking the dogs and stuff, to hear where every hour you're pushing on the bike, you're taking it away from your bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
There was no time between finishing on your bike and getting into bed. You know, I got it down to 20 minutes. That was stop, upload to Strava, you know, maybe a quick post to say how we're getting on. Of course, I felt that huge responsibility to let people know how we were getting on, which for me worked really well when I made Glyn an admin on the Facebook page, because then he could update people, to having a shower, to having, you know, my recovery shake, you know, cover myself head to toe in Sudocrem and lie in bed and try and get as many hours as I could. And the second I woke up, the same thing again. I got it down to 20-30 minutes to get up, get everything in, get your breakfast in, pack your stuff for the day, get out. It was hard. So had I pushed on for another couple of hours that night, I probably would have started later. And the roads are quiet in the mornings, like it's nice.
Yes. Yeah.
You need that to start your day off, because every day the first 10 miles was awful. I felt like I was never going to be able to do it. But I always knew that after 10 miles, 2 bottles of water and a jam sandwich, I was going to be fine. To the point where I would ring my mum every morning, but I wouldn't ring her until after 10 miles because I didn't want to tell her how bad I felt. By the time I rang her, I felt great. So
you were ringing your mum up every day saying, I'm on the bike?
Most days. If I was somewhere like on a bike lane, like the bike lane that runs alongside the A9 for so long coming up to the borders.
Yeah.
I mean, we had like a good 25-30 miles of that. Mm-hmm. That was perfect because there's no one on it.
Just chit-chatting to your mum saying around here.
Chit-chat. This is what I'm doing today, this is how I feel. Yeah.
So, I mean, look, from a nutritional perspective, drinking at least, 500 mils every 40 minutes, 30 minutes?
say probably slightly less than that. Probably a bottle an hour.
Bottle an hour, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you have anything religious that you were eating over the hour? This thing, I must get that in, or were you just
something? In my head, I couldn't let an hour go without eating.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things I messed up on the last day because I was so busy seeing people. Is that every time I pulled into a lay-by to see somebody, I didn't pull in and eat and drink. I pulled in and had a chat.
Right. Okay. So
and then went on again, and the next thing I know, I'd gone 2 hours, 3 hours without.
Wow.
And I wasn't swapping my bottles over.
Yeah.
Because I was chatting, and Glyn was chatting because he probably knew them as well. I wasn't. We were at our best, when it was just us, obviously. But we loved seeing people, so it was really tricky.
So, what do you have in the water? Just water and electrolytes, or water, electrolytes and energy mix?
Completely mixed it up. Right. Just whatever I fancied. Sometimes I just have a bit of squash because it was tasty. Sometimes just water. Very often I'd have an electrolyte tablet in there. I'd have several of those a day. And then Tailwind I tried.
Right.
Which I had tried obviously before because that's a bit stupid not to try it. But not every day actually. But I use it as a bit of a top up.
Just juggling it around to whatever you felt like.
Yeah.
And on the bike per hour, what we were aiming? As you said, jam sandwich, but anything in particular that you were eating?
I had to be really, really flexible, and this is what I wanted to do all along: is not have this schedule that I stuck to, because I knew the minute I had this schedule and I didn't fancy it, or I didn't eat a meal, or something happened. Even the weather. If the weather's crap, you can't eat the same food, and I knew that I'd probably just lose my mind if I couldn't stick to this schedule. So I was eating breakfast really well for the first few days, and then I just couldn't. I just wake up and I was just like, I can sit here for an hour and waste time trying to get hungry, or I can get on the bike and make it up as I go along. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to eat something, maybe a banana, but obviously I knew that wasn't enough. And that's when I would take my jam sandwich with me to eat, a couple of bars, and then I would have my super second breakfast, which was a shake that one of the ladies from Mojo has discovered, which was peanut butter, soy milk, oats, a little bit of protein powder in there, and it was thick, and it was over 500 calories, and then I'd have that with a couple of pastries.
Nice.
And that was like my big breakfast. That was 1,000 calories. So I knew that my mid-morning breakfast was going to make up for my rubbish first breakfast.
So, but the jam sandwich, etc., everything you talked about would be enough to get you to your super big breakfast.
Yeah.
And you are starting early in the morning, so I mean sometimes knowing that the hydration is important, and then think, well, I'm just going to eat what I fancy is the better way to do it. Especially if you're doing the distance that you were doing. And you do get flavour fatigue after a while. I think, I just don't want to eat that anymore.
Yeah, you have to eat what you fancy. You have to.
Was there anything in particular that you ever thought while you were riding the bike that you really wanted to eat and you were asking Glyn for? Because I find that when I do these things, it doesn't really come to mind, but occasionally something in the back of your mind goes, I really wouldn't mind eating that at some point today.
I got quite into the pastries.
What were they? Sort of like croissants and
pan of raisins, and that kind of stuff. I got quite into that. I suppose the foods that you tend to limit in everyday life, isn't it? That you think this is a real treat. So in your head you're like, I can do this,
But the other thing is just like you see those foods and you think, well, actually, I'm just eating that because I know it's got lots of calories.
Yeah.
I'm just going to chuck a couple of those in.
But no, nothing. I didn't think of anything.
Mine weirdly, as a and the guys were like, of everything that you are eating on a bike, is I can't believe that's the thing that you want to eat, was a prawn sandwich.
Really?
And they were like, what do you mean you want a prawn sandwich?
But is there something in prawns? This is the thing that fascinates me, is there must be something in prawns that you were missing.
I don't know what it
Magnesium,
was.
is it?
No, it's not. I don't think it was even that. It's just one of those weird things. And I said to them, I was like, I don't want a rubbish prawn sandwich as well. So if you have to get it from Tesco's,
I'm not interested.
Not interested. And they're like, okay. And actually, they came across a Waitrose, so they got me this amazing prawn sandwich. And I was like, wow, that's just. And they were like, you never guess what we found you. And I was like, oh. So it's just weird. And it's like just throughout the week, like, we found you one. But it's funny how those can be quick wins or big wins mentally as well as.
oh no, I won't say physically, but actually psychologically, mentally, it suddenly gives you that oh, okay, right,
yeah,
this is great.
I've done that, brilliant, tick it off. I think you need that, you need those. I mean, obviously, as everyone has said, like, oh, you know, you need to break all this down into bite-sized chunks, you need to break the whole challenge down, and we all know that from Ironman, don't we? You know, you don't stand at the start of an Ironman and start thinking, how am I going to cope with a marathon, because it's just too big, isn't it?
Yeah, you need to swim.
But those mini wins, I think, are really important, aren't they? Going, right, I've eaten dinner. That's good. That's a good thing. You know, I didn't have to liquidize it. I was hungry for it. I've digested it. I feel okay. But I had one nutrition mess up. I'm not very good. When I get low on sugar, I get quite shaky. And I'm not very good with then loading a load of sugar on. I don't think anyone is really, but I know that about myself. But we got to just this side of Carlisle, and Glyn had already gone through in the van. Going through cities was quite tricky for him because the van's big. And I messaged him, and I was on this road, and for some reason, whether it's something like actually wrong, but I can't tell very often when hills are up or down. I have to just gauge it by my legs or look at my bike computer. So I thought I was going down, but it felt really hard. So I was like, that's it, I'm fatiguing, but I was actually going up. So I messaged him and I said, I've run out of food, I've messed up, I haven't put enough food in my pocket, I really need something. There was no shops, we were in the middle of nowhere, just above Carlisle. And he said, okay, I'll come back. So he came back, and I knew he had gone to Morrison's and got these brownies, 4 brownies, and on top were like cornflake cakes. So it's like a brownie and a cornflake cake all in one. I was like, this is amazing. So I stopped and had a chat with him, and I was eating it, and I had 2, but they were big, like huge, like you could have cut it into 3 and it would have been enough. Had that was all fine. He left, and my body just rejected it.
Oh really?
Totally and utterly rejected it. I wanted to just lie on the road and just like curl up. It was horrible. Yeah, I felt sick, and that's luckily we weren't far away from the Scottish border. This is day 3 because I really wanted to get to Scotland on day 3. And I just got to Gretna Green, and I was like, I'm done. I felt so ill, and I was like, I just need to get rid of this.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was that big hit of sugar, so I learnt that lesson, but thank God that wasn't early on at 40 miles, because I don't know what I'd have done.
Throw you.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Could have ruined the whole thing.
Yeah, totally. So from a psychological perspective, I mean, cycling up to John O'Groats and back again, were there ever moments where you got horribly low, or were you always just, I can get this done, you were just constantly, no, I'm on this, was there any moment when this isn't
No, because I think it built, I think like I was it was something so new to me I'd never done before. So every day I did a big day, I was like, oh, well done. Like, I was really kind to myself. I was like, well done you. Like, if this doesn't work, you've done some good riding today. And when I got to John O'Groats, that was another big milestone for me. I was like, if you don't manage the whole thing, you've gone to John O'Groats in like under 5 days. And I always remember, and I could be totally messing up this story because it's like 10 years old now, but I remember that being down in Cycle Scuderia and like say 10 years ago, and I remembered some people in the shop, and I didn't consider myself to even be much of a triathlete then, let alone a cyclist. I probably got in with my old bike, and I overheard someone saying, so-and-so and so-and-so locally, there's a group of 5 of them that did Lands and John O'Groats in 5 days. And I can remember them all going, that's tough. And you know, and this at the time it was 5 guys that went together. You must know who it was. I don't know who it was, like, but I thought you'd gone with them.
No, I know who it was.
Was it Calvin?
It was Calvin, Dan.
Rich Coombs.
No, not Rich Coombs. Andy Warner.
Yeah.
The guy that owns the giant shop in Barnstaple, and there was one other person. I can't remember who the person was, but yes, they did that. Yeah.
And it's one of those times that, like, what a conversation you overhear. You overhear millions of conversations, but that stuck with me. Even as a non-cyclist, that stuck with me. Like, 5 days to Lands and John O'Groats with a group of men together, all working together. That's fast. And even then, I thought to myself, you know, as a non-cyclist, not even a triathlete, I was like, no, I'll give that a go. And I surprised myself when these things pop into my head. Only when I verbalise them, I realise how silly they sound. But once I'd done it, once I got up there in those 5 days, I was like, whatever happens now? No one's taking that away from me.
No.
And I love that about cycling, like we were saying about triathlon versus cycling, or racing versus doing your own challenges, is no one can ever take that away. Whereas when you race, you know, someone will come and beat you. You know, it's all zero the day after the race, you know, and then we just look to the next race. And
well, it's a bit like that with doing your self challenges. You sort of do them and you walk away and go, well, that was intense, and then people ask, what are you going to do next? And and have a moment where you think, can I just get over this just now? But internally, there is something that's thinking, well, it will happen, but I'm just going to let those thoughts just subside for a little bit, and something will come along.
And that's why I wanted it to be official, and I didn't have to do the whole Guinness Book of Records thing, because what I didn't realise is that if you want to have it approved, the record, and I was very late obviously deciding, it takes about 12 to 14 weeks to get it approved, and I didn't have that time. I had to pay £600.
Wow, I didn't know that.
To expedite it, to get an answer back in 5 days, and you can't set off until you had an answer. And it wouldn't have been official. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I can't afford this. Do I need to do this on top of everything else? Like, on top of thinking about the fuel that we were going to use to go up and back. I was like, oh man, this is so much money. And then I just thought, if I did it, how would I feel? Like, if I can have that certificate to say I've done it. But it was a big decision. It was a lot of money.
There's a part of me that goes, sometimes the money equation has to come into it. But there's another part of me that thinks when you take on these challenges, you go, I'm prepared to spend that money because I'm actually, A, raised a lot of money, but B, it's pushing that challenge on you. I'm committed to doing this.
But also in the 2 weeks before, when they approved it, it gave me another push forward, like, oh, I've spent this money, I have to do this. I have to take this more seriously than I am thinking about right now.
Right.
Because I probably wasn't taking it very seriously.
Right.
I wasn't getting my stuff together, I wasn't getting my kit together, I wasn't thinking ahead, and it made me think, no, this is serious. You've got more skin in the game now.
Yeah, so if you spend, exactly, that's the thing. So if you spend money throw your own money into it, you suddenly think, well, actually, I've got to really sort of take charge of this situation now.
Yeah.
Because it's
you've got to make it worthwhile, and I think it gave me that extra jolt forward as well.
It takes it from, well, this is fun and it's all giggles, to it's still going to be fun, but I need to be serious about the actual event. It's amazing. So is there anything in particular that you've come away from this thinking, or is there anything that you've completely learned from this you didn't think you would learn?
So I've been saying it for a long time, but I think what I have done with this is I've proved what I keep saying to the ladies that I coach, is like, you are all more capable than you think you are. And I say it on a daily basis. I said it like in the dark, going up those Cornish hills when I didn't even know my own name. I kept shouting, you are stronger than you think you are. That was my mantra. Every pedal turn was, you stronger than you think you are. So that's really exciting, and I think I'm excited by it because I'm like, wow, what else can we do? And hopefully other people are excited by it because they're like, yeah, do I restrict myself, So that's been really interesting. The thing I didn't realise about the trip actually was quite how it would affect me mentally, being like a bit sleep deprived and tired, and maybe at times a little bit food deprived. Is like about day 4, I got intense paranoia.
Oh, really?
It got worse and worse and worse, and I could dampen it for a while, and in the mornings it was okay, but as time went on, and that's why riding in the dark wasn't very good, I got to the stage where I literally thought people were out to kill me.
Wow, I was going to say,
really bizarre.
So manifested itself.
Really bizarre. And then that last night when I was going through Cornwall, and Glyn was literally having to say, you've been following this map for 1,800 miles. Why can't you follow it now? And he'd say, right, you go in that direction. And I'd be like, yeah, brilliant. And I'd go back off again. Get to the end of that road and I'd be like, yeah. And I just kept saying to him, I cannot retain the information you're putting into my head. And also, why are there people being murdered in fields next to me?
Oh, really?
That's how gone I was at that point. But it had been building for a little, it was really bad at that point, but it had been building for a while, particularly like going through Preston at night. There were boy racers. I was convincing myself they were out to get me, and I was going to, get knocked over. So that paranoia was a real thing, made me realise how important sleep is.
Mm-hmm.
Because you take this back into the real world where you're training, triathletes training every day, maybe even twice a day, you're tired, you don't get a good night's sleep. How is that? That's probably coming into your everyday life, isn't it?
It definitely affects you psychologically.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I wasn't prepared for that.
So, I mean, God, that's scary actually. It's like, and you don't realise just how sleep deprived you are from doing something like that. And you rode big days. So your last 3 days, you pushed on well into the night.
The last day I went overnight.
Yes.
The other days I went into like 11.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's,
12.
Yeah.
But I think probably the success of it up until that last day, I'd read Marcia's blog and she hadn't had a huge amount of sleep at all, like 1 hour a night, 2 hours a night, sleeping in churchyards, That wasn't for me.
No.
I knew that I wasn't going to do it. If it got, because I knew how bad it was without sleep. I just knew it. I'll never do a challenge overnight. I'll never do a 24-hour something. It wasn't my choice to do 24 hours on the last day. But at the point that I knew I desperately didn't want to stop pedalling until I got to the end, I was too far gone to rationalise it. And I wouldn't listen to Glyn. And he said, you need to sleep. And no. You need to sleep. No. I've got to get there.
So when you turned up at Land's End again, were you were obviously sleep deprived, but did you feel yourself coming a bit more back into the room then, or were you still a bit gone?
Yeah, because the adrenaline kicked in. It's not to say that any of those feelings went away. I think you know how powerful adrenaline is, don't you? The adrenaline of finishing, the adrenaline of seeing Glyn again, and also it started feeling better when it got lighter and I started getting messages from people again. So I was, for someone who's so intrinsically motivated all the time, I was very extrinsically motivated come the end. And seeing the donations rolling in as well, that really set that adrenaline going, like I've nearly finished. But I've always had that attitude in races, in Ironman, like the quicker I do this, the quicker it's over and I can start recovering. And I think I ended up in the last few hours having that attitude. The quicker I get this done, I've got to pull something out of somewhere to get this done. Because also, the quicker I get this done, the quicker Glyn's recovering. Because that was always such a huge thing for me.
That's interesting. It's just like, so, you're in a world of hurt and you're psychologically a little bit all over the place, but you're also thinking about someone else at the same time. Thinking, I need to finish this and Glyn needs to finish this as well.
And he was in a lot of pain as such, seeing me like it. I can remember getting into the van at one point, it started raining again. I got into the van, it was pitch black, but we didn't know where we knew where we were, but we were middle of nowhere, I got into the van and he said, just sit down. And I said, have you ever seen me this broken? And he said, and I never want to see you this broken again. And he was so deadly serious and almost a bit angry. I was like, right, I'm not that bad. Let's go. But that makes it sound like, that was very much the last 50 miles. The rest of it was brilliant. I was way more with it. I didn't put myself into that position all the way up and back.
No, exactly.
It was only the end.
Yeah.
I don't want people thinking like, masochist.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the thing, that you've done a massive amount of miles. Those last 50, that you'd expect yourself, especially with the lack of sleep, to not be at your greatest.
Yeah, it was going to come.
Yeah.
I was owed it, I think, in a way, because I felt like I had, sailed quite a bit of it that maybe I shouldn't have done.
But it is interesting to put yourself in that position, because you learn so much about yourself. And as you were saying, that mantra of you're stronger than you think you are, you can do this, and that's something that you instill into the people that you coach. It's quite an interesting experience when you're dealing with people from a normal 9-to-5 job and they're doing Ironman as a sport. There is that sort of understanding now that they can, it's almost like, look, I've put myself in the world of hurt.
Yeah.
You can do Ironman.
Yeah. It was really interesting because one of the ladies that I coach I spoke to a couple of days ago, and then they were incredible. Like, this wasn't about Mojo in the slightest. This was about Galgos. This was about something I wanted to do. But for the first time in about 3 years, maybe even longer, I was able to do something that I knew I was capable of doing. But because I was injured and I was going down this, I'm a triathlete, but I'm injured, so I can't do triathlon. I never looked outside of that window. And I got so focused on it and like all the things I can't do, look at all the things I can't do, rather than going, just go pivot slightly to the side and look at all the things you can do. And that's been a massive learning curve for me, and for me to help out athletes that are injured, long-term injured. Don't want to do there's a lot of triathletes that come into it, go, I want to do triathlon, and then they just, no, I just do not want to ride the bike. I'm scared of it, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Great, let's pivot, let's do something else. So I think that's been really important to me, and really important for me to prove to myself what I'm capable of, just by sidestepping a little bit into what I would say a different sport, but it's not, is it?
Well, it
a
is.
Different discipline,
It is, because I think, I think I coach triathletes as well as cyclists. So I always say, we talk about this, if you're a triathlete, if you are multi-juggling everything, life, work, kids, family, dogs, and training, you are one of the best sort of multi-jugglers, sort of people who can deal with time and everything else on top of it. I think cycling is still, if you really take it on board and you're trying to do things that you're doing, it's a massive sport.
Yeah. It's multifaceted in itself. I feel like it's opened up more doors. Because I'm like, I think of all the other cycling things I can do now. How amazing.
And there's a big cycling world out there.
Yeah. I feel like I've found a new sport, which I think is really exciting. I haven't had that feeling since I found triathlon.
So, so when you did your 100 miles every day back to back through Europe, I messaged you and said, keep going, it gets addictive. And you were like, oh, don't say that.
No, it won't get addictive. I'm a triathlete. As soon as this injury's sorted, I'm back into the triathlon bandwagon. But no, you're absolutely right. It does, and also like the simplicity of going from multi-sport to single sport, I find really nice. There's a real, we all have the ability to overcomplicate everything multiple times a day, don't we? And we overcomplicate thought processes and what we're doing, and particularly when you run your own business, like you overcomplicate that as well. And it is down to a few principles, really. And another coach actually messaged me very kindly, because I must have said, when I announced what I was going to do, I must have said, any advice welcome. Messaged me and said, just focus on the things that are going to stop you pedaling. That was it. He's a man of few words, but my God, were they useful. And I just went, that is so simple. Focus on the bits that are going to stop you pedaling. And that was it. And that's how I did all of my prep. And that's what I thought the whole time I was doing it. Just
like, what's stopping me from getting...
What's going to stop me pedaling today? Well, if I don't eat, if I don't drink, if I don't look after my bike, if I don't look after Glyn, who's providing all of that for me. If I don't get the route right, if I don't get any sleep, that's going to stop me pedaling. And that was what I singularly focused on. So what that did is that made everything very simple, very basic, and with that, the worries of everything else fell away. And because I wasn't working, and because I wasn't thinking about anything but the challenge for 10 days, all the other things that I overthink, all the other, details, they just didn't come into it. That was amazing. That's what helped me do it. But that, I think, also is what made me have a massive come down last week from it.
Oh, really? Yes.
Really,
yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to feel so low, because I just focused so singularly on that one outcome for so long, nothing else mattered. To then suddenly to say to your brain, now everything else matters, Lou. You're back to normal life, get back into it within a day, and also carry this fatigue into it and this slight paranoia that has only really just subsided. And make sure you recover, make sure you get back to work, and make sure you think about all these, and it was all this noise started again.
Yeah.
And I think that contributed to you feeling down. And I can see now why, I don't put myself in any of the categories of the great adventurers or anything, but you can see why a lot of great adventurers, when you look at what they've done, they have done challenge to challenge to challenge to challenge, they never stop. And I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that, but I can see now it's because it's a drug. You bounce from one to the other, because the feeling afterwards when you don't have it, I think, is immense.
What I've discovered from doing the long distance stuff is that you suddenly, as much as you are thinking about other things that go around you, you also think nothing except about you and the bike.
And what I love about it, like I would go out training, and a lot of people would say to me, I've worked in sport all my life, and people would say, isn't sport great for mental health? You know, isn't it great for like sorting problems out? And I would go out when I was training for triathlon, swim, bike or run, I'd come back and I would probably feel worse. So I would ruminate over things that had come into my head. They were bubbling around, I couldn't do anything about it because I was on the bike. And I'd come back from that training session and I wouldn't feel better. I'd feel physically better, but I wouldn't feel mentally better. I wouldn't feel worse, but I wouldn't feel better. The thing about long distance cycling that I realised in France and then again in La Jog is that these thoughts would come into my head and then they would go out and I would pay no attention to them. They were just, I wonder how so-and-so's doing today. I wonder if so-and-so's moving house today. Gone. And there would be no, that's my, it was so mindful for me.
Mm-hmm. And it's everything, every time I've done long distance stuff, that's exactly how I feel. So again, it's not about what's going in and outside of what you're doing. You are literally very present in what you are currently doing. Because you can't focus on anything else. This is what I'm doing. I'm riding the bike from here to there today, and that is it. So thoughts do come into your head, but as you say, they go very quickly out.
They go again, without any sort of conscious effort into trying to solve anything or.
And I think that's partly because you're tired. You're trying to focus on where you're going. You're navigating at the same time. And it's like, you realise you can't spend any mental energy on thinking on anything outside what you're currently doing.
It's back to what the coach said to me, like, focus on the stuff that will stop you pedalling. Getting anxious about something that's happening back home will stop me pedalling.
Yes, totally.
Will stop my enjoyment of it at least, as a minimum, won't it? So that was fascinating, but I can absolutely see why, when I finished, there was a few jokers that were like, I'm waiting to see what you do next. It's like, God, that'd be ridiculous. I don't do anything like this again. No. 2 days later, back on the old Google, what do you think I'm capable of now? But that was purely to stop this feeling of probably loss in a way. And Glyn very rightly said, like, of course you feel lost. You've had 2 weeks of people telling you how great you are every minute of the day. That's not real life.
It's not real life, but I don't think it's that. I think that once you realise that you've just done something that you never thought you were capable of, then you take a step back.
It's such a high, isn't it?
And you think, well, actually, what is possible if I really, give it a go? And it's an interesting thing, and I think you're right. This is why some of the people just to go from one event to one event to one event to one event, because they can't do normal life. But they find it hard to do normal life. It's fascinating.
Really fascinating.
I'm going to finish off the podcast with one question that I ask everybody. If you could have a conversation with anybody in the world, dead or alive, past or present, who would that be and why?
My dad. Because he wasn't there.
Right.
And like, getting up to John O'Groats, it was so bizarre because it was like, it was the summer, of course, and it was, I'd seen the sun go down, and Glyn's this most fantastic photographer, and I was sort of like, I'd messaged him on the phone, and I was like, have you seen the sunset around the corner? Like, you're going to take some nice pictures? And he's like, yeah. Took these great pictures, and then the sunset, and then it was still light, and it really, at this point, I'd nearly done 200 miles, and I was starting to lose it a little bit that day, but I need to get to John O'Groats. And when I arrived, I went down the hill and cycled straight up to the sign. I put my hand on the sign and it was still light, and I genuinely felt like I'd got to the top of the world because of that ambient light, and I was like, this is it. And I suppose you feel a bit closer to people that aren't there then, don't you? You're like, I've got to the top. He'd have been pretty pleased to hear that.
Yeah. Cool. Look, thank you very much for coming in.
No worries.
It's been a real pleasure to chat to you.
It's been great, yeah.
Congratulations. So
thank you.
You are the world record holder for female to cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats, and John O'Groats back to Land's End.
Yeah, female solo record. Yeah, and
That's
raised £20,000 for Galgos, which I think it stands equal to being the world record holder, if not above, because what they're doing with that money is permanent. They're building a building off the back of what everyone donated. So
Wow.
That's fantastic. It's a recovery rehabilitation building for dogs.
Well, then what I'll do at the end of in the comments in this podcast, I'll put a link to their website, and if your fundraiser is still going, I'll put a link to that as well.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Super. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, great to speak to you, Si. Thank you.
I hope you really enjoyed that interview. Now, if you're interested in finding more about the charity that she's supporting, I'll put a link to that in the bottom of this podcast and in the comments box below. Righty, that's it for this month. I'll leave you with this. Keep riding your bikes, stay safe, and I'll speak to you guys next month.